To that I am live. That was a boom there. The mic just moved. Good to see you all. Sorry, I'm 13 minutes late tonight. Yes, technical issues and whatnot. I had OBS on the wrong settings and I had to find where the normal settings are, and it happens. Anyway, hope you're all well. Good to see so many people coming in. I see we've already got a bunch of people here. Steve from Berkeley, the Red Mercury Files. I don't know what sheep you're referring to, but I'm sure they were. So yes, thank you for pointing that out. Akuhe, good to have you here, Akuhe. We've got Sergeant Bilko, Mr. Cordy Chap, Razel, good to see you. Counting down, Quint Ranked, boom, indeed. So yeah, good news is tonight. Oh, Ahmed also, good to see you. Aaron, hey, good to see you, Aaron. Good to see everybody rolling in. Some more good news is that there's not a lot of topics to talk about tonight, which normally I optimistically think means that I won't need to take very long. But of course, who knows? I might talk at length about some of the things there. Arno Zoo, good to see you. Hey, indeed. And excellent to see everybody there. Subaru the car. Subaru is an excellent car. Always a pleasure to have a good car like a Subaru there in the comments. Very popular in New Zealand. Tokyo 503, boom. Say hello if you're in the comments. I love saying hello to you all. As you know, I like to kick off the show with all the hellos, and it's just nice to know who's out there. Yes, indeed. Yes, famous last words saying that I don't have any topics, but you know how it goes. There really aren't that many tonight. Yeah, I'll take my time. Osaka wins indeed. We'll be talking a little bit about that. It's been a good week for her. Yes, indeed, good to see everybody there. Remember, as always, if you'd like to get my attention with a particular request for a topic or a question or something, I just realized the aircon is a little bit noisy. I'm just going to turn it down. Oh, it's on quiet mode. I guess the room, perhaps I was just causing the room to heat up. But remember, as always, that we should have JJ Welsh mediate my topic. She was an excellent mediator of me. She took no shit. I told her right before we started, I talk too much about everything, and if you see me doing it, don't be shy about just cutting and just be ruthless, and I will look for signs. And but she was really good. I actually really appreciated. She was really good at, without talking over me, she was good at just jumping in at the right moment. And I took the hint and shut up. And because of that, we got through a lot of topics. So yes, indeed, I think I could really use JJ Walsh. She did mention, and I think we are planning to do maybe a monthly check-in on sort of an environmental sustainability perspective, but I can do that. Thanks, Ahmed. Thanks for the confirmation that the AC is fine. Yeah, so good to see you all. Remember, if you want to get my attention, do what Ahmed and Raz just did. Don't need super chats, but always very happy to accept them. Thank you very much. But just at Mark Hiko Simon, and it will flash up orange like you can see there, and that makes it easy for me to tell that you're talking to me or you've got something that you would like me to address, so that it would be good. And yeah, so with that, we are already 10:47, so I'm going to jump into the topics. And boom, first topic for the night. Tokyo 2020 should be held at any cost. Even upon the graves of 14 million Tokyo residents, we will achieve the Olympics in July 2021. It's kind of weird that they're still calling it 2020. I guess they got all the trademarks and stuff on that. And I understand Tokyo 2021 probably is a long shot. I think was trademarked by someone else. So they're going to keep calling it 2020. But yes, what they're talking about from this, hey Tokyo 503, I'm glad you watched the show. I thought it was good. I thought she was actually a very good host, and yeah, I was able to share some topics there I haven't shared before, so I thought it was good. Yeah, with the Olympics, the basic story I think from this week was not that they'll hold it even if everybody in Tokyo catches COVID-19, and they don't care. It's not so much that. It's more that they will hold the Olympics even if it's in front of empty stadiums, which actually, when you think about how many countries with worse COVID situations are now holding sports where they're keeping the athletes in isolation, and they're reducing access to try to make it safe for the athletes and so on. I don't know how you do this. Still, even with the Olympics, there are so many athletes that would be hard to do. But, basically doing this in front of empty stadiums, that makes sense. The only thing is that, those tickets for the Olympics are like, $1,000 a pop, and they've sold a lot of them. And if they don't sell those tickets, the assumption is that would translate into debt for the organizers, which will translate into debt for me as a taxpayer in Tokyo, which will translate into us paying for the cost of those empty seats forever. And that would suck. This whole thing was basically, it started out as a vanity project by the former Tokyo governor Shintaro Ishihara, who wanted to live the glory of the Tokyo 1964 Olympics and World War II. I do find it interesting. Erin, yes, I will get to that. That is one of the few topics that I have, so I will spend some time on that. That's what I could spend the whole show on. But just to finish out on the Olympics, I do find it really interesting that the Olympics, I think, has only been cancelled once in 1940, and in that time as well it was due to be held in Tokyo. So it's kind of funny. The Tokyo 1940 Olympics cancelled due to war. The 1964 Olympics, of course, were an enormous success. They really were the coming out party, as it were, of Japan, recovering from the war and so on. It really marked a true milestone, actually, for Japan in its post-war recovery. And I don't know, it looks like now 2020, is this a cycle? Is this a thing like that? Like every second Olympics scheduled to be held in Tokyo is going to be cancelled? It doesn't look very good, does it? But yes, indeed. I think they might as well have it anyway. I think it's ridiculous how much the Olympics cost and the economics around it nowadays, and it should be simplified, because frankly, it should be the sort of event that any country should hold. And truth is, there are very few countries economically able to sustain the costs. It's gone a little bit too big, so I'd be happy if it changed. Oh, Tokyo 503, thank you for the correction. Helsinki 1916, that would make sense. That's right, during the Great War, World War One, that would make sense that it got cancelled. Anyway, it'd be good to see it. It'd be a great shame, of course, if people are not able to travel to see it. But it's really hard to imagine even 12 months from now, even with vaccines, frankly, because even if there are vaccines, the thought that it's going to get through every 8 billion people, it's still hard to see how there's going to be the plans for the big travel bonanza that was planned for the Olympics, which is a shame, but it is what it is. And, I think accepting the reality and trying to get on with it, I do think it's worthwhile holding. Just one other thing about the Olympics I don't like in recent years, other than the fact it's gotten way too expensive and commercial. I don't know, maybe this was because when I was in elementary school, like when I was in primary school, the first Olympics that I really remember, of course, New Zealand was among the countries that boycotted the 1980 Olympics that were being held in Russia due to the invasion of Afghanistan. Small bit of history. The world, of course, a lot of the African countries and the communist bloc boycotted the 1976 games, and that was partly because of New Zealand. That was because of us. That was because New Zealand played a series of rugby test matches against the South African rugby team when they were fully in the middle of apartheid, and the rest of Africa basically boycotted the Olympics because of New Zealand being there, because New Zealand was all, we should separate sport and rugby. It was disgraceful that we really wanted to play rugby against South Africa. They were our big racist rival. But what was really shameful about the way that we played against South Africa was the South Africans didn't like New Zealand having so many Maori and non-white players in the team, and they asked that we only select white players on tours to South Africa. So New Zealand, we would actually willingly drop our best players who were like Indigenous and Maori and Pacific Island players, and they would allow us, and the South Africans magnanimously allowed New Zealand to have only one non-white player in the team who they would call an honorary white. They were always allowed to take one Maori person, and it was like a privilege somehow that this Maori person would be considered an honorary white for the tour. And New Zealand bought into this and went over there because we wanted to play rugby against them, and that caused half of the world to boycott the Olympics. And in New Zealand, we didn't even talk about that very much. It was still controversial into the 80s. Olympics are but coming back, what I remember from the first Olympics I really remember is the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles. And I really remember as a kid, I think there was still a great big emphasis, at least maybe it was because I was in school, but on the idea of sportsmanship. The idea, the amateur ideals, the idea of celebrating, the people who try really hard even if they don't win, and friendship among countries. And I don't know, I've noticed like the last few Olympics, maybe it's just my age, but it feels like the nationalism aspect of it, like you wouldn't know if you're in America or Australia or a lot of countries and you're watching the coverage, you wouldn't even know that there are other countries there competing almost. and the win at all cost, mentality that's come into it. The medal count being, like a real. I guess the medal count was always a measure, but there's a lot of things about the Olympics that I perceive to have changed. Maybe it's just me, maybe it's just my view of the world, but I really hope that perhaps this is an opportunity to reset all of that. So who knows? But it does appear that hell or high water, including empty, expensive stadiums, the Olympics will go ahead next year. So we'll see how that goes anyway. But yeah, Mr. Cordy Champ, New Zealanders didn't want the All Blacks to play against South Africa. It was controversial. When the South Africans actually were invited to a return tour of New Zealand in 1982, there was a kind of close to civil war state. There were really big sort of riots. The people determined to block the games, who went onto the pitch and tried to stop the teams playing each other. And there were people who were, violent. There were violent riots about it, and it was ultimately because of the debacle of the 1982 tour that the whole thing, that New Zealand finally decided to stop playing against South Africa, and all the players just before the World Cup, a team of the best All Blacks went to go and play in South Africa in 1986, and all the players got banned. And that's why in the 1987, the first ever Rugby World Cup, the whole New Zealand team were new players, and they won the World Cup. But it was amazing because all of the best players were banned from playing because they went to South Africa. So we got the message eventually, but even sabotaging the Olympics didn't actually do it for us, and that's a really embarrassing episode in our history. So we're all tied up in that as well. ASDF 12131, good to see you. Glad that you can make it to the live stream. Hope to make it interesting for you. And so this was an interesting one. Now, there are two people I quite just like. Lately I've been following a little bit more. Serpent ZA, who is a South African guy, a good, seems to be a pretty nice chap. He's lived in China forever. Probably as long as I have. He's been living in Shenzhen, I believe. That's fluent in Chinese. Used to do great travel blogs, motorcycling around China, talking about Chinese society, being critical and showing off the country very well at the same time. And there was another kind of friend that he would sometimes do videos with, or he'd do travel videos with, who also makes pretty good content, called Lao Y something, some numbers on the end there. And I don't know if you've been following the drama on their channels, but they recently both appeared to be in the middle of getting investigated by the security forces over in China, and they both decided rapidly to leave the country, and they're now making blogs from outside of the country. They were always a little bit critical of the country, but more so now than ever, particularly Serpenzia, and it's fun to watch. However, they're continuing to make good videos, and one of the videos made by Laowai is this video here, and this video has made the rounds a little bit. It's a story about a Chinese language professor talking about fillers in different languages, like and in English. If you know any Chinese, you know where maybe you know the story already. If you don't, you probably know where I'm going at this point. He's a Chinese teacher talking about fillers in languages, and he is a professor of Chinese at the University of Southern California. And when he was in this class explaining how in Chinese the main filler that people say, they use the word, in Japanese they say ano, which doesn't mean, actually eto and ano really don't mean anything, but in Chinese, and I believe in Korean as well, they use the word for that, like that thing, like there's that thing, what's that thing, and the word is basically spelled N-E-I or N-E-G-A, N-E-I-G-A or N-E-G-A, ne, and you pronounce it like ne or nei, and the GA on the end. And of course in English it sounds like a rude word, it sounds like an offensive word. But here's a Chinese professor in a class of linguistics explaining explicitly, for the purpose of the language that he teaches and is fluent in, that this is the word that people say. And apparently some students were triggered by his saying of this word that sounds like an offensive word in English, and they reported him to the dean, and he was removed from the class. He was essentially fired. And I get the anti-Chinese hysteria in America. I mean, on the one hand, there are things about the pressure being brought to China on right now that I've always thought the fact that the requirements of foreign companies looking to trade with China and operate in China are far different from the conditions. China's always pretty much had an open door, and we've done it deliberately. We open up our economies to China to help China prosper. and it's never been a two-way street. And that made sense when China was really poor. It doesn't really make sense now. They're doing quite well, and I'm for that. But the way it's been turned into a political, quasi-racist, it's literally like the old yellow peril scare. All the fears of China. It sort of has mixed into racism and prejudice and superstition and conspiracies, based upon many legitimate issues. Not starting with, lots of problems with the government in China, of course, the human rights issues and whatnot. But people sort of take that and they layer all the other nasty stuff that they shouldn't be layering on top, and that I don't like that. However, this case here, I don't think this was linked specifically to anti-Chinese racism, although that would be in the great California tradition if that was the case. But the fact that someone was fired for a homophone, a word that sounds like something like another word but has a totally different meaning, is clearly ridiculous. Yeah, and half the place names in New Zealand are WHAKA, which you pronounce like a soft F, like a fucker. How many in Japanese? I remember I saw on Twitter Michaela talking about how much she gets people making 8-year-old jokes about Fukuoka, the place name Fukuoka, and so on. Every language can be put into rude words, and hell, sometimes even in English we just have archaic names that are offensive. There are actual place names in New Zealand I didn't know about that were until recently, or even on maps, still named with like the N-word as the place name. But here's a guy teaching Chinese explicitly in Chinese, and apparently some people can't handle hearing words in foreign languages that sound like bad words in English. And that is just nuts. He was right to call attention to it as ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous. That's kind of funny. It's kind of funny and ridiculous. If you get triggered by that, what are you doing learning Chinese? However, you do hear stories about this. You hear stories about people traveling, or people doing military service in Korea or whatever, who hear on a bus. They think they're being talked about. They don't understand what they're saying, but they hear that word being said over and over again, and they think it's about them, and they go punch them out. And yeah, that would be appropriate in America, but you have to understand different countries are different. So I thought that was interesting and tragic. Oh, Lely Farley, thanks for the recommendation, Aaron. I will check that. Lawa86, thank you for the correction on that as well. They're good channels anyway. Check them out, and they can explain all the China stuff far better than I can or ever would. But they're both really interesting channels. They've both been through genuine, interesting drama lately, and they're worth checking out. So yes, moving on. The government and the opposition. I won't talk very long about politics. I know that you guys. It's funny how the comments always just sort of stop. It turns into crickets. I don't care. I'm just going to talk about it anyway, very quickly. The opposition. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Life of Brian, but the Japanese opposition. I consider. I'm showing my age here. I'm talking about two movies where I was very small when they were around, but I was born, I believe. The Life of Brian, Monty Python. Just watch it anyway. And Brewster's Millions. If you're a conspiracy theorist, my conspiracy theory is that they've actually been promised $1 billion if they lose unlosable elections, and but they have to not let anyone know that they're actually doing it on purpose. The challenge of Brewster's Millions. Same thing here, I think, with the Japanese opposition. They just lose unlosable elections. The government has got like 3 or 4 people right now. They've got the former Minister of Justice on a criminal trial. They've got Chinese casino bribes, another lawmaker from the government being arrested, and the opposition, the COVID thing is sort of a mess. The Olympics is a mess, and all that the opposition has been talking about for months now is taking the former main opposition party, the Democrats, the Japanese Democratic Party of Japan. Well, they hated each other, and they had all these factions and all these sort of fighting things, and after they lost the election, they said, screw you guys, and they split into a whole bunch of different parties. And everyone realizes that being in a whole bunch of disorganized parties doesn't look very good, so we should really reunite. So basically the two largest former Democrat parties, the party formerly known as the Democratic Party of Japan, basically these are like the opposition parties, like the People's Front for the Liberation of Palestine in Monty Python's Life of Brian. We have to remember who the real enemy is. What? The PFLPP. It's exactly what the Japanese opposition parties are like. They spend more time fighting with each other. So basically the story is that the two biggest formerly Democrat parties got together, the Constitutional Democrat Party and the National Democrat Party, got together and they agreed that they were going to merge 100 with the Constitutional Democrats, 40 lawmakers with the National Democrats. They were going to merge back into the Democrats and get back together again without any real explanation about how they were going to stop the explosion that happened last time happening again. They still fundamentally all disagree with each other. And what happened was this. You had the Edeno, the guy on the left there. He was in charge of the main big party. The smaller party's leader, a guy called Tamaki, he agreed after months of negotiation. They agreed to merge, but after the agreement was made, some of the lawmakers was within that party. They agreed that they would only merge if they were going to have a vote on the leader and a new party name, which would symbolize the new unified party. However, Tamaki, the leader of the smaller party, decided at the last minute, hey, you know what, screw this, guys, I'm gonna go and make my own party. So after basically handing his party over and setting it up to have this internal vote to choose a new name, the leader of the smaller party bailed and said, I'm setting up a new party, and then 14 other people followed him. And meanwhile, they had the vote for the new party, and when they created this new merged party, everybody voted for the leader of the new party, of the larger of the two parties, and the same name. So it just basically turned into a hostile takeover where half of the people going into the party, including the leader of the party, just like got cold feet at the last minute and went and formed. So they're calling themselves a new party. They're like a new party and a new leader, but it's the same leader and the same party. And all the time, they're just like completely oblivious to all the disasters happening everywhere else and not doing anything to hold the government accountable. They're just fighting with each other. It is ridiculous and funny and crazy. Tai Nakamura, good to see you. Yes, who else is here? We've got Dan H. Good to see you, Dan H. Good to see you there. So yes, basically, the opposition is just it's a hopeless joke. And this is the thing. I'm not saying that I want them to be good. This is the problem. And they don't even have to be good. They just have to be slightly below average, and they would get all the votes. But yet they just aim and hit below where they need to be all the time. So that is a thing, and they really are. We're forgetting who the real enemy is here. To them, the enemy is more each other than it is the government that they're supposed to be holding accountable. So, that's always what that is. Tassé Views, good to see you, Tassé Views. Nice to have you there in the comments, a new name. In the meantime, I don't actually have a thing on this, I don't think, but the leadership election of the LDP for voting for the next Prime Minister, that will be this week. It is going to be the cabinet secretary, basically because they have little clubs, little factions within the LDP, and basically everybody has already said that they're going to vote for him. So it's basically a dog and pony show. They're having these fake policy debates, and they're having these debates like on cameras, in front of TV cameras, but no one is voting for them except for other lawmakers and regional, chapter leads from the LDP. So this is just an internal party election, and they're actually campaigning towards like the factions that are going to be supporting them the most, including the bureaucracy. So Suga's already said, of course we're going to raise the sales tax, and I'm going to give a whole lot of perks to the old ministry which I used to oversee. We're going to emphasize cell phone regulation and spectrum, rates and whatnot, which is you would never campaign in an election on in Japan. You wouldn't even raise that in an election, but it's basically just them campaigning to people who control the country but you can't vote for. So the old thing. Andrew Morboy, good to see you. Welcome back into the comments. Accent, excellent to see you, sir. I do actually always like Accent in your Instagram, your designs of cars. You actually make those? I mean, they always look super cool. Anyway, good to have you there, and good to see you, sir. So anyway, moving on, Sony is going to triple renewable energy usage to 15% within 5 years. And you might say, well, that doesn't seem like very much. Sony is a massive user of electricity, of course, both for manufacturing and, hosting online, like, the Sony PlayStation gaming services and cloud hosting and whatnot. It doesn't seem very big. This is actually, again, go check out the video I made with JJ Walsh. We talked a lot about this. I kind of got into my old chestnuts about this, that... she wasn't entirely impressed with my with my opinions about renewable energy, but it's this 100% renewable energy, awesome, and it's more achievable now than in the past, but it still is a pipe dream. And I think if you look at climate change as an emergency, like decarbonizing electricity should be the first priority, and renewables should absolutely, as much renewables as possible should also be another priority. But first thing is they've got to turn all the nuclear reactors on, because the planet is getting hotter, and yes, you have massive problems with nuclear power. I'm from an anti-nuclear country, but I think the risks of nuclear accidents are, while terrible, and the problems of managing the waste are smaller problems. They're enormous problems, but they're still smaller than the problem of global warming and less urgent, frankly. Do that first. I know she doesn't like that. A lot of people don't, but that's the first thing. And then in terms of renewable energy, Japan could be doing way more renewable energy, but they can't because the power grid is just screwed up. It's just 8 little teeny tiny power grids, and each power grid can only take 5% of what's on the grid where they are. Of course, you can improve that with new smart grid technologies, home generation technologies, and whatnot, but the point is that Japan has a really low total capacity for grid-based renewable energy because of the structure, because the power grid is like a 19th century accident that needs to be updated. The problem is, it's expensive to update power grids, and Japan basically needs to overhaul its entire national power grid, which will cost trillions of dollars that the government doesn't have, and people wouldn't understand the benefit of it. They don't want to spend money on power lines, but they need to do it if they want to be able to help make renewable energy more available. I would like Sony to set more aggressive targets, but there again, I don't like, hey, butter emoji, stop it. Musashi Mark, excellent to see you. Long time no see. It's one thing I've noticed Europe does a lot is they set these very flashy targets, like for car emissions. They set higher standards than the US. But then when they realized that the standards were unachievable, the car manufacturers put cheat devices in all of the diesel cars. So it's one thing to sort of show off making great big promises, but if you can't achieve them. One thing that's with Japan is that they're always a little bit conservative, but they are mindful about setting achievable targets. And I'll give that to them, but 15% I'm sure is achievable, but you do want to see a little bit of vision and hope, and companies like Sony, technology companies, I mean, you'd hope that they would be not just looking to buy renewable energy, but actually figuring out how to generate. I mean, even buying cells and batteries and whatnot from companies like Tesla if they need to, rather than just relying on the Japanese power generators that are never going to give them very much. So look, I think I'd take this as a solid commitment, and it's good that they're starting to think in this direction, but I'm hoping that they're also thinking bigger and doing more about it. So we'll see. Yes, must have written to YouTube government. I see lots of orange going up the screen, although I get the feeling there's a lot of butter trolling there, so I am afraid to look up. The power lines here are a mess in many ways. They are above ground. Some people say, why don't they bury them below ground? But we did that in New Zealand, and when we had a few major cables burst, we couldn't find where the lines were. So having them above, but they are a mess, visually, and just the grids are poorly made. Let me just quickly check. Tase Views, it's great that I know so much about politics in depth. Well, I just like it. I just pay attention to it, and I find it interesting. Thank you for noticing, Tase Views. Musashi Mark, excellent to see you. Must have written to the YouTube government. Hell yes. It's not dull, ASDF. Seriously, I'm trying as best I can to make it sound sexy, but obviously I'm not doing a good job. So yeah. I watched a movie this week. A friend recommended the movie Train to Busan. It's actually one that's just on Netflix in Japan it's available, but it's not available with English subtitles or English audio. So I listened to it in Japanese. It was just dubbed, but it's funny when you watch Korean movies, and particularly a movie like this with a high production value. I always find this about Korea when I travel there as well. When you're expecting it to be different, you think, wow, this is really like Japan. But the moment you start thinking it's really like Japan, then everything that's different about it stands out. Korea's like that. It's kind of close and not close at the same time. It's always kind of messing with you. But when you have everybody that's speaking Japanese, truth is Japan has a huge, probably actually quite a substantial portion of the population that has, within a few generations, some Korean heritage. There are differences. There are stereotypical, both in terms of how makeup and how they wear. There are differences in appearance. And just for a thing on this as well, apart from the fact I used to work in a souvenir shop, and it was kind of my job to be able to distinguish Korean tourists from Chinese tourists from Japanese tourists, and I felt racist while doing it, but you can kind of do it. Although you'll make mistakes sometimes. There are people who are in Korea who you'll be sure are Japanese, and whatnot, and who knows, maybe there are these connections. I thought it was super interesting that there was a school district in South Korea that actually bought the school like textbooks or something from or the books that they write in, the notebooks that they write in, from a Japanese supplier. And apparently the cover photo had pictures of children on the cover. And there were some sufficiently racist, ethno-nationalist Korean parents who noticed, apparently they said that the eyes looked like they had double eyelided, which is really rare in Korea and more common in Japan, and they were sure these must be Japanese children. And they did a huge investigation into the notepads and found out that yes, these kids were in fact photos of Japanese kids, and they'd sourced the stationery from Japan. I don't know why they would do that. I mean, how that would save money or anything like that, but apparently it was this huge scandal over in South Korea that these people noticed that these children looked like Japanese kids and they didn't look Korean, and they picked the difference, and it caused a scandal there for a time. Yay, racism. But yeah, anyway, watching this movie, I found it quite natural to watch, and I found a lot of the people there, apart from the fact I have Zainichi Korean friends, of course, who are just fit here. You don't even honestly blink or notice them. So yeah, this movie, anyway, the English title should clearly have been Zombies on a Train. Clearly that's what it should have been. Train to Busan is like the most boring. It's like they're not even trying. This is a movie about zombies on a train, and I've watched Korean movies. To tell you the truth, I just don't like the style often. The thing about Korean movies is that they look for your heartstrings, they look for those nerves that can kind of twinge an emotion, and then they get a hammer and they just hit it with it. They just hit you with it. It's all slow motion and violins, and it's good, but it's like, dude, it's like they find the thing that works and they just hammer you with it. And this movie kind of does it, but it kind of does it quite well. It's actually, and I don't like zombie movies. I'm not a horror slasher zombie movie type person, but this movie was actually quite. I realize I'm halfway through and I'm exhausted because I'm holding my breath half the time, because the scenes are so tense. I mean, again, it's the old hitting you over the head with a hammer with a good thing, but done better than usual. So actually, this was an enjoyable movie. I'm finding it hard to find good things to watch on Netflix lately. The best thing about it, somebody pointed out on Twitter, is that the movie should have clearly been called. Well, the Japanese title for this movie is Shinkansen. Of course, Shinkansen, the word for bullet train in Japanese, but if you switch around the kansen, Shin means new, kansen of course means transport system in Japanese, but of course it also means the word for infection. So it's a brilliantly titled movie in Japanese, far better than the title showing there, and it's actually worth watching. Again, I don't know if you're watching it outside of Japan, you might be able to access it with English. You might be able to find it with English subtitles or English dubbed, but yeah, I just watched it in Japanese, and it was like watching. And by the way, if you think I'm being kind of like pro-Japan nationalist when I'm bagging Korean movies, Japanese movies are crap. I mean, I came here a Japanese movie fan, and there are a few good Japanese movies that I like, but most Japanese movies that come out are just terrible. So I really actually don't like either one. This was like a good Japanese movie, and when I say that, I mean that like there are not many good Japanese movies, so it was a good movie. I actually quite enjoyed it. Worth watching. Andrea Moboya, you haven't watched it yet. Watching G. I don't know what G is, but yeah, it's worth checking out anyway. Some K-drama. I don't know if this is your thing or not, but it was enjoyable. The Social Dilemma. We are there. Aaron, I know you're looking out for the stationary wars, but yes, stationary. Like everything in the relationship is stationary because of the stationary, I guess. Homophones. Apparently, I Googled, I used the word, it seems like people there were homophonophobic. The problem being, apparently, when that was said, or apparently some people in America have been triggered by the word homophone, thinking that it was like reference to sexual orientation and offensive. Yeah, people are just stupid nowadays. Mathology. Anyway, good to see you there in the comments. And Shubhas, excellent to see you there in the comments as well. Nice to see people rolling in. Well, here's a movie that I also watched this week, The Social Dilemma. I'll tell you what, talk about getting hit over the head with a hammer. This kind of was getting hit over the head with a hammer. Look, the in terms of like my critique of this as a documentary, it was a a bit of a danger type documentary. The main point of this, honestly, you could have summarized in 2 minutes. I don't summarize anything in 2 minutes, so I'm not going to do that for you. I will do it for you in slightly more time than that. The reenactments and the dramas, the simulation of the Google algorithm of three guys screwing with a poor Facebook user, and the family that can't escape from its mobile phones and whatnot. It wasn't really necessary. What was interesting about it, I suppose, was not that they were saying stuff that we all sort of know, but that they had actually the people from Facebook and Google and Pinterest and all the people who were the architects of the algorithms and the way that these apps work, directly saying exactly how these things work and how they think it's destructive and why they don't let their families use social media, even though they work for social media companies. That was kind of interesting and kind of eye-opening. And it was in terms of what the show was, what this movie is about. They could have just said that. I guess people know this, but again, they really hammered this message home clearly. Advertising's always been about persuading people to lean them towards buying your product or wanting your thing or whatever. But people have found since 2010 that social media has put basically a whole bunch of tools, really, really high-powered tools and algorithms, in the power. Basically, the goal of each one of these services is to capture your attention and to hold it for as long as possible by any means necessary. The idea being that the longer that they hold your eyeballs onto the screens that they have, the longer they keep you doom scrolling, the longer they keep you checking for notifications, the longer when you look at your screen time, the more hours you spend on that app, the more time that they can place ads and so on in front of you. And this whole time, but not just from when you're browsing the site either, they use cookies to trace everything else that you do with your phone. And basically, they also build up these amazingly detailed profiles of us that both can predict the behavior that we're going to do, and they can influence and change and modify not just our behavior, but things that we think and so on. And these things are basically, because the overall goal is to grab and hold you for as long as possible, these are fine-tuned by already artificial intelligence, extremely powerful computers, and they are increasing that power, and they're increasing the effectiveness of this algorithm all the time. Yes, they are dragging people who are, multiple different users of the same sites are being fed. Basically, they can tell if you are if you emotionally react. They can tell if you look at something for too long, if you react to something, if you, and they will feed you more of whatever is getting a strongest reaction from you. And if that is outrage content, or if it is content that affirms a certain view that you become interested in, and you go down a rabbit hole, and we've all done the going down the rabbit hole things. The technology to make you go down these rabbit holes, and the idea is that they're not trying to turn you into pro-Trump or anti-Trump. They're not trying to turn you into anti-vaxxer or whatever. They're just finding out what will trigger you and hold you, and through that keep you on the site and keep you looking at the ads that they have, and they build up these profiles. And essentially, their customers are not us. We're what's being sold. The customers are the advertisers that they can sell, really targeted. They can figure out what age, what demographic, what your interests are, and they can really effectively sell ads to people, ads that are more effective with people than could be done before. And so the result is you have this huge phenomenon now of people just unwittingly spending way too much time, and because the ways that they're discovering to capture people, they're not really considering the ethical implications of what they're using to capture people. It's deliberately accelerating by design, just by automated, apolitical, amoral design is causing this sort of political polarization, these sort of conspiracy, bursts, anything that's sort of interesting. It just plays off our negative thoughts of what holds our attention. So, yeah, I know. I think we're all aware of this. It was talking about when it was talking about notifications, for example. Of course, having this channel and having an active Twitter account. Pardon me. I realized a long time I was getting way more notifications than I could process. So a long time ago, and this went through different phases for me, like talking about my dealing with overload of social media. First of all, I think when my first video went haywire, when I had a channel with like 10 people watching, and 10 subscribers, every time there was a subscription, I'd write them a, hey, thank you for subscribing, good to know you, hope you enjoy the channel or whatever. I would say hello and thank you to every single person. That's what it was like back in the early days. And then one of my videos got featured on YouTube, and I got like thousands of subscribers in a couple of days, and I got a little bit of dopamine, I got a little bit of a thrill, and a little bit of, oh, let me go say hello, and what's your channel like, and oh, it's great to know you, and let me know what you'd like to see. I'll do this for everybody. And all of a sudden I get a couple of thousand views in a couple of days, and my channel, one of my videos was featured, the How I Learned to Speak Japanese video, featured on the top of the main page in Japan. And I literally got like nightmares, like Max Headroom type MTV video, flashing video clip, complete overload. I was panicking at how much stuff it was. I was thinking, is this too much attention? Like, am I gonna get in trouble at work? And I was cold sweats, nightmares breaking out. And so basically I turned off all my YouTube notifications. I had to switch all my behavior of reducing my engagement. Anyway, I'm kind of lucky. My channel's not growing that much lately. It doesn't like the live streaming, the long form videos, but I'm quite comfortable with how this is. But I had to adjust for that. And then I noticed years later that I was always looking at my phone, because there was always a notification from Twitter of somebody just responding back to a comment or something like that. And I started to notice my screen was just covered in notifications all over the place, and I would always want to make them all go to 0, and that was really bad because I get a lot of engagement. So again, just to cope, I just mindfully decided to turn off all of my notifications except for family messaging and work emails. So I did that. And this is where I started to realize things like, as well, I definitely noticed when I was on Facebook and when I clicked on a video, how I would go down these doom scrolling rabbit holes of videos. And I also noticed that when I would find something outrageous and I would comment on it or share and say, isn't this outrageous? I would start to see more content like that. It would feed me more of that. And I started to realize it was picking what was triggering me the most and feeding me more of it, and it was causing me to feel miserable. So I started this is one thing that I did with Facebook, and it was partly why I hardly use Facebook anymore, except to let people know that I'm putting up a video, is that I started, every time I saw content that was triggering me, I would do one of two things. If it was someone who I didn't know very well, maybe a follower who follows me on Facebook, I would check their feed and see if that's all that they're posting. Is this all I'm going to see from this person? I would react to the feeling of being triggered, not by doing what they wanted me to do, click or comment or like or do a emoji, but I would block the content. I'd find it really, it's actually quite therapeutic. I highly recommend it. And I would either stop receiving the feed from the person posting it if I didn't know them very well and they seem to post that a lot, or I would select the content source, because there's a lot of these farms that put up these videos and so on, and I would say block all content from the source, and it really cleaned up my Facebook feed. But the thing is, I've never found Facebook very good for information. I love YouTube for information, I love Feedly, I love my RSS feeds, that's what I'm sharing with you, and I love Twitter because actually a properly managed Twitter also is great for information. But what I don't do on YouTube and what I don't do on Twitter and what I do with Feedly is everything I watch, I try to curate. I'm using all of this as a tool. I put this together because I find this interesting and I enjoy, hey, Lysander 45, and I like to, Japan-UK trade deal, I will get to that right after this. Sergeant Booker, I absolutely turned off notifications. That I did that years ago, actually. Although I admit I do log into Twitter probably more than I should to check if anyone's responded. I look in the app to see if there's been any updates, but I definitely turn off notifications because I found it too overwhelming years ago. But I did notice as well, I noticed the trend that if I'm going to YouTube and I'm looking at the top screen, one, I'm missing out on my subscriptions that I want to keep up with. And this whole feeling caused me, well, I'll get to this, but this was one thing I realized that the home, and I was getting into similar rabbit holes like on Facebook, and I really didn't like the feeling of that. I didn't like the feeling that I was being fed kind of trashy content, but that was very, very clickable, clickbaity content a lot from YouTube. And Twitter, I found the home feed was always just a mess. And so it was when I discovered there are these kind of buried features first of all, Twitter, I use lists. I pick out people that I find are reliable for providing interesting content, like in terms of news or worth following for Japan. So mainly people that I know, or people like journalists that put or share content from really good, reliable sources, and are not to one way or the other. And that list has grown that I have, but the people that I select are a limited subset of that. I'll look at the home feed sometimes, but I'll just generally, if I want to browse on Twitter, I curate this feed. The thing is, though, to make the lists and to go in and follow that, you always have to go through like 3 or 4 clicks. So they make it a little bit far away and harder to get to than the default home feed. But that is how I consume Twitter, because it puts me in control of what I'm seeing. And without that, Twitter can be as crazy as Facebook. And of course, Facebook gets crazy engagement through its home feed. It's very effective. And Twitter's is not so much, but I don't want to see that. That's the point. So I tried to take control of my Twitter through using lists. Same with YouTube. And with YouTube, I tried to take control by only looking at my subscriptions feed. But of course, the subscriptions feed is always kind of broken. And, like when you want to catch up videos, you have to go through one by one and filter through and find the content. And this frustration of how hard they made this to do compared to just watching the recommended video. That's why I made my Chan TV. That's why I made that app, which is still in the middle of Google verification right now, but making progress. But it's there because, I wanted a way to be able to watch my subscriptions and the content that I choose to watch and that I have already curated and said I want this to be my algorithm. I wanted to make that as easy to watch and auto-playing at me as the home feed. I didn't want to watch the home feed. I wanted to watch the videos that I said I want to watch. What is scary, by the way, is that after ignoring the home feed for so long and using all these tools to deliberately brute force it to show me the videos that I want to watch, the documentaries, the makers that I like to watch reliably, the sports I like to catch up on, I have noticed that lately the home feed has gotten a lot more intelligent than before. And whereas before I really felt like it was taking me away from my interests and just trying to force me into the mass content, it seems to be noticing now that the home feed now recommends my subscriptions a whole lot more. And it recommends channels a lot like my subscriptions. It recommends documentaries that I like now. It doesn't just send me off to sort of million view trash. It sends me to obscure videos, but that are more aligned than before. So again, I can see it's kind of scary. The home feed is becoming more useful, and I can see Google getting more intelligent. Even when I'm really powerfully, I'm designing tools to help me avoid it, and I can see it getting smarter and learning in a way that I'm finding it useful, which is kind of scary as well. But this is why I made my Chan TV. And what I love about Feedly is, RSS, nobody uses it because it's so much work. You've got to find all these websites, you've got to find the RSS link, you've got to plug it in, you've got these feeds going all the time. But the point is I completely control it. So I use sites as tools. But I must admit, the thing about this is that it makes me feel like I'm in control. It makes me feel like, I'm getting the benefit. Sure, I'll put up with some ads because it's a free site. And look, YouTube, this site, this is one of the most amazing tools ever. The idea that, it was so revolutionary, the idea of democratizing broadcasting, the fact that you can put out as much video of any content that you like. That I'm on equal footing with commercial broadcasters here. As a TV addicted child in a country with 2 channels, the idea of what a mountain it was to get even a 3rd TV channel in New Zealand, and yet now there are people making as good or better than TV content in tens of millions of channels on YouTube. And that I get to sort of join in the conversation and actually broadcast out as well as read. That democratization of the ability to broadcast, which used to be almost in most countries was a state monopoly, that is mind-blowing. And that is what really still appeals to me about YouTube. But yeah, it's important to remember, and what this documentary talks about is that YouTube is yes, they are an amazing tool, but that is not their business. Their business is not being an amazing tool to me. Their business is having content, is having people glued to the site. And and the aggressive ways in which they do that are advancing way faster than people's ability to adapt to it. And like we've always been aware of, or have had the ability to be aware of advertising and the way the ads try to manipulate us and stuff like that, and sort of get ahead of it. But these people are pointing out that the technology here is so aggressive, and it's so, they subliminally, consciously and subconsciously, they attack us in so many different ways to capture us. And the impact on kids growing up, the impact on adults of the way it's taking our attention away from the rest of our lives. And I must admit, I looked at my screen time after watching this, and I felt satisfied that a lot of the things there, like looking at my Feedly, were things that, well, I decide myself that I want to do consciously, like as something that I want to do, but the hours were long. So yeah, I highly recommend watching the documentary. It's the first thing, you don't really have a chance of doing anything against this unless you're self-aware, first of all, of what it's doing. And even when it is, I try to make sure I'm mindfully using social media on my own terms, including this broadcasting. Um, I don't think I'm attracting conspiracy theorists. It was funny, the dramatized, the sun being drawn towards the extreme center was one of the kind of goofy blood on the highway drama sort of things intersped with the conversation that wasn't really necessary in this. But I loved how they showed the vloggers talking to people, and you can trust me, I'm your friend. I was like, I don't do that, do I? I appreciate the fact it's a fantastic tool for letting us communicate, but yes, we have to be mindful of what it's all about, and how scary it actually is to the people who made it. So it's well worth watching. Anyway, that was a long conversation. Hey, Waito-san, good to see you. I saw some other people ask. I don't have it in the comments here, so I saw. What do I think about the UK-Japan trade treaty? What are the opinions about top 20 butters worldwide? I wouldn't know, because we only get Japanese Stalinist butter. And it's actually not bad, I must admit. Got butter t-shirt, yes. I see. Oh, having fun, aren't you? Very good. Why don't I just turn off notifications and stop running the apps in the background? Oh, sorry, I saw that one before. Thoughts on the Japan-UK trade deal? Stilton. Well, I like blue cheese. I mean, it's a bit salty. I don't want to be flooded with it. I wish we had fought over butter instead of cheese. We have enough cheese, and we get cheese from Europe here. Look, I think it's an excellent deal for UK. I've heard that the UK is actually now looking to join the TPP. They're looking to set that up through doing trade deals with other TPP nations, including New Zealand, Australia, and Japan to start with. On the one hand, you'd say, well, why is the UK moving out of one of the best trade blocs in the world, the EU, and looking to join the TPP on the other side of the world when it's right beside the EU? But of course, I suppose the big difference is what British were reacting to. Well, in a way, they got a little bit spoiled and ignorant, I think, about the economic benefits of the EU. They overwhelmingly believed, of course, that they were losing money being in the EU because of the contributions. But at the end of the day, I do admit that I suppose that to the extent that reasonable-minded people were inclined to leave the EU, it was over the infringement of sovereignty and immigration. Whether that's reasonable or not, I won't comment on. But I can understand that those concerns are a big difference between the EU and the TPP, for example. The TPP is purely a free trade zone with no particular free movement of people and no ability to impose legislation on one another. And in the UK, I know from a distance that the moment that the EU became the EU instead of the EEC, and they started going further into dropping borders, which makes total sense on the continent. But the Brits being hesitant and saying that's not exactly what we signed up for. We just signed up to be in an awesome economic zone. It is still weird that they want to join the TPP, but look, I think it's wonderful in any way for any country, wherever it is in the world. I mean, I come from New Zealand, so this is also partly because of my background. The more countries can have free and open, starting with trade, without restriction. I mean, to me, I want to be able to eat fruit gums and eat Cadbury's chocolate and have meat pies and, watch cricket. So look, to the extent that that we can do anything to reduce those barriers and allow me to, as an economic unit, be able to consume anything that I'd want from Britain here, yay, I think it's awesome, and I think it's in both countries' best interests. Also, Japan and UK have a really long positive history, apart from World War II. But before World War II, in World War I, the Japanese Navy was protecting British merchant shipping in the Indian Ocean. The Brits asked Japan to protect all of their stuff in World War I. And going back further than that, they've got good historical relations. I think this is a good foundation for Britain and Japan to actually, once again, have much closer relations. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think ultimately I would like the world to sort of be like in a big EU, personally. I think that's where things can and should go. We're sort of going backwards from that right now. There's a sort of backlash against that in the EU, I know. But look, I don't know if this is going to end up like that, but certainly I think this is a great positive thing. I hope the UK understands how lucky they are as well, that they got a deal the same as they got with Europe when they are not Europe. They shouldn't have that negotiating leverage. And I thought they were negotiating a bit big for their boots, but look, I think Japan did the right thing, giving them a good deal. And it's good for both countries. So, yay free trade, yay fruit gums. Please send them here. It's chocolate and fruit gums. Believe in yourself. Sorry to hear about the storm, but happy to be the calm. Couple more stories. I started 13 minutes late, so I have 5 more minutes. Oh God, there's Naomi, Osaka. How am I going to do it? I'm going to run over time. I was so sure I would. Okay, I was so sure I'd nail this. That guy is a poo face. There's a man in Japan. There are no mandatory laws or enforcement of masks and social distancing and whatnot. They just ask people politely to do it. However, Bozo got on a plane from Hokkaido going down to Osaka, and he refused to wear a mask when he was asked to wear a mask on the plane. But it wasn't not wearing a mask that was the problem. It was the fact he turned into a rowdy, abusive, shouting, threatening passenger about it. He started abusing the staff. He started abusing the people around him. So much so that for staff safety, the pilot decided to divert the plane to Niigata, where they kicked him off the plane. And then they flew on to Osaka. The airline, a low-cost carrier, has decided that they are going to invoice the passenger for the lost time and fuel from the diversion to Niigata, which they think will be around $100,000. They're going to invoice him from that, and the police are also looking to press charges for his conduct on the plane, basically reacting negatively to being told to wear a mask. So mask morons exist here in Japan too, but pretty much the internet unanimously is piling in on him as that is a bad thing. Way too much American television, indeed, accent. And you know what, this is the thing as well. If you watch The Social Dilemma, I don't trust anything I see out of America anymore. I'm sure there are large groups of people who passionately think they shouldn't be forced to wear masks. I mean, they seem to exist, but America is a country of 300 million people, and I have increasing despair that maybe the whole population or a large part of the population is really stupid there. But at the same time, I hope that this is a small part of the population being blown up and made to look like a big part of the population. I'm hoping that America isn't as stupid as what I'm seeing in the media. I'm hoping that's the social media trying to trigger me to make me click on the videos because it's working. Those Florida hearings, they were something else. However, the disease is here and everywhere. There are idiots everywhere. So there you go. Naomi Osaka, awesome. Just won the US Open. And I wouldn't care. I'm not really a tennis person. I know that Andrea and other people here definitely are. So it's probably a bigger deal for you. Nesta, 125, good to see you. Right in a Speedo, good man. Or women, I don't actually know. One awesome that she won. I'm not a huge tennis fan, but obviously we see her in the media here in Japan, and I can say that I think it's just it's really good for the social fabric of Japan that to have someone like Naomi Osaka as a hero here. I think what she is doing, there were some murmurs of that the sponsors weren't happy with her threat to pull out of a Black Lives Matter, or that she's using these masks with the names of people shot by police to foster the conversation about that. But I think the way that she's sort of used her position, to draw attention to issues that matter to her, the way that she spoke in the interviews after the win, and remembering as well that she is representing not just Japan, in fact, in this capacity, not really Japan at all, but she is as a representative of Haiti and of someone who's grown up in America, and that she is also not bending to the demands of sponsors or representing Japan like as you could bet a Japanese athlete would, that she's sort of thinking and representing her own views and being a role model and putting that ahead of pleasing other people. I think is remarkable and great, and I think it's really nice to see the way that she is developing as an athlete and as a genuine person. I think she's going to be a great role model for the multicultural kids growing up, not just in Japan but in the other countries that look up to her. Japanese companies still not promoting women, still very far behind on the gender gap. we're up on time. This is yeah. So, some people were shocked that 42% of firms are promoting women to key posts, or actively, i.e., they're proactively looking to increase the number of women in leadership positions. It's a tough issue. I've talked about this before. It's hard when you don't have the pipeline for it. It's kind of a generational issue. When you've got companies that didn't even have any route for women to get to middle management, and all of a sudden they want to fill the top seats with them. You can't. It's not as simple as just simply finding random women, putting the tea lady into the director's chair. You have to. You don't want them to fail in those roles. There are more and more companies at least starting to make this a priority and take it seriously, but it's going to take a long time. I see like there's progress, at least in terms of intent and recognition that it's something that they need to do, but still only 42%. In Japan, on the gender gap global ranking, recently came out 129th out of 151 surveyed countries, so still doing badly. It really is baby steps here and not going fast enough, but at least it's progressing. Final thing is that there was a cashless payment Docomo app, which some people found out that if you connected this to someone else's bank account or your own bank account, you could take money out of it. Like Docomo would just let you do it. They wouldn't check with the bank if this was actually the person holding the bank, the cashless payment Docomo, the mobile phone app. They wouldn't check if that was the same person who really owned the account. They wouldn't do those safety checks. And right now, people all over Japan are having their money being removed from their bank accounts by people using this Docomo app. And in spite of this, in spite of these vulnerabilities and these sort of flaws in the app, Docomo is refusing to shut down the app. So it's driving people crazy. People from 15 banks, including Japan Post Bank, are suffering from this. And there's nothing you can really do about it, because these people who are having the money taken out they don't have the app themselves. Other people have the app and they're just putting in other people's account numbers. And Docomo's not checking it, and they're just taking the money out. So that's the thing that's happening this week. I don't know how they haven't gotten in more trouble. It's probably because they're NTT and the government doesn't want to crack down on them too hard, but it looks pretty bad. That's what's happened this week. We are up on an hour. It looks like, as I said, I thought I might finish this early, but I did not. Erin, basically, they're sending a PSA to everyone saying, don't do what this idiot did. Exactly. I think that's part of it, a big part of it. All these few topics. Yes, Sergeant Bilko, you got me again. This is how the show goes. Well, I'm going to finish here. It's been a good week. It is late. I'm going to go get some sleep. Have a good week. Everybody stay safe. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter if you'd like to have a conversation, or check the topics that I'm finding during the week to share. Always up for that. And otherwise, stay cool this week. It is getting lovely and cool in Japan. Good running weather. And I'm looking forward to talking to you guys next week with more of what's going on in Japan. So stay safe. Boom. Keep cool till after school. Peace.